Hey everyone, welcome. Today is June 18th, 2024. Welcome to the Mortgage Doc Community Tuesday live event. We meet every Tuesday for about 30 minutes, usually give or take, and we talk all things Encompass. And we've got live chat on here in case you want to use chat. Brian was so busy trying to document, broke it up into two separate spots. Brian beat you, Chris. There you go. For everybody else, if you're joining, thank you very much for coming. If you're listening to us on replay, totally cool. If you can get here live, that means you can ask live questions. I know if Luba makes it on here, she's got a question we're going to talk about. I am a traveling salesman for the next 2 weeks. Chris so for those that don't follow this shenanigans of first to be the first person to chat, that's another reason to get live, to be the first to chat, to beat Chris. So Brian, he basically says he didn't earn it, he gave it to you. So I think that's kind of rude, Chris. Just say. Anyway, for the rest of us, you can come up on stage, and that just means you can either enable your microphone, or you can come up on video too if you want to share screen, especially if you've got something going on in your environment. But that's why we meet. That's why we meet. Today's topic is when are there too many DDM rules and when to use them. We really talk about, for the month of May and the month of June, we're talking all about Encompass self-health checks. I've been spending a lot of time talking to everybody, not only about their business rules. You know, last week, if you missed that episode of the community call, we spent a lot of time going through business rules, but then also going over the native functionality that Encompass has inside of it to show you what's taking up time when you go to save. And so pop quiz, has anyone actually tried that? And if you did try that, were you surprised by what you found? So basically, for those, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I showed you how to go in and use the full diagnostic mode, as long as you have the save bar enabled in your admin tools. And when you enable full diagnostic mode, you can go into your environment and you can see how much time is taken up by Encompass to actually save your file. So don't know if you did that. If you did do it, I'd love to hear what your save time was. I think an average save time, and again, everybody's a little bit different, but I think an average save time of around 5 seconds is probably fairly average. If you're well north of 5 seconds, it's probably something to pay attention to. And I think, again, in last week's call, it was mentioned in chat that ICE can give you this 30-day look back for like what your plugin time is running, which I think is good. I think that's kind of a partial story, though. The full story is actually the thing I went through. And so Jeremy asks, would this only be for Smart Client? And so Jeremy, are you asking, would it also affect Encompass Web save times? You have to tell me more about that question. Yeah, so Encompass, remember, so to answer your question, would this only be for Smart Client? Yeah, for desktop. I like to call it Encompass Desktop because it's easier to remember than Smart Client. So yeah, the methodology we went over last week was exclusively for Encompass Desktop. Mostly because Encompass Web is on the ICE AWS servers, right? So those things are going to run smoking fast. Your save time on web, that'll be interesting to see what happens as custom tools come in and obviously plugins get installed. That'll be interesting to see. But yeah, your save time on web, it's usually less than a second. Save time on desktop, again, I talked about this earlier in health checks. I think it was like the beginning of May. I don't know if anybody's done this again, where you literally take a stopwatch on your phone or something and take 3 measurements for each of the following. Logging into Encompass to get to the pipeline view, opening a file, saving a file, and then closing a file. So those 4, if I get my finger up here, those 4 timing events are what you take three measurements of to get an average. And that's what your team has to do all day long. So anyway, all right. Topic, first of all, questions. Luba, are you here? Luba. I see you here. So Luba, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? Did you want to come up on stage, or you just want to type? Your choice. Type. Of course you're going to type. So go ahead and type. And while Luba's typing the question, and this was a setup because Luba went on the community and had a question, and she's talking about it. And I said, hey, listen, bring it to the Tuesday call because you're probably not the only one that has this question, nor would you be the only person who would be interested in the answer. So that's a call out for everybody who's watching this live or on replay. If you have a question that you want to have gone over in any of these community calls, please use it. Use your available time, and let's do it. Beyond that, I do want to stick on topic here. All right, so here's the question. I'm going to get to the topic in a minute. So here's the question. I need to set a document placeholder called UW Notes to be visible to let everyone, to everyone, but not editable by anyone other than an underwriter. All right, so we're going to talk native first, and then Candace is going to talk about a plugin. Watch. Let's see if Candace talks about a plugin. So what you should be thinking of, hopefully, is a protected doc workflow. And that's what Candace typed in, isn't that protected doc? So yes, so the business rule is role access to documents, but you create a protected role in your roles. And there's lots of, and the reason why I want to talk about this as a group is because I found a lot of, let's say bad information, but information I certainly wouldn't give with regards to creating how to do this. And so the best way to do this is you create a protected role in your roles, and to create a protected role, please use a user group. I know there's some folks out there that like to create a persona for this, and don't do it. Just use a user group called protected. You don't have to put any members in there. Just call it protected. Add that protected user group to the protected role, and then go into your role access to documents business rules and have that as an available role. So again, this is pretty technical. If you have no idea what I just said, please say something in the chat. If you do know what I'm talking about, then you'll understand the following. Every persona in the eFolder tab has two columns. Left column is for unprotected documents. Right column is for protected documents. A lot of people, when I go into their environments, they have both of those columns. Every checkbox is identical, which is not ideal unless that's intentional. So to Luba's case, Luba, now this again gets into multiple persona syndrome. Assuming that you've got the underwriter persona, and that's the only persona that they have that you're using, you would go into that persona and you would actually have both of those columns of fields checked. So they can do everything with an unprotected that they could with a protected. The hard part is going to be the following. You're going to want to make sure all the other personas don't have anything enabled in the protected document column of the eFolder tab of their persona. That's number one. Number two, you have to make sure your underwriters understand how to protect the documents. It's really, really simple. When they want to protect a document, whether it's one or multiple from the Documents tab in the eFolder, simply select the document. If they want to do it from the Documents tab, select the document or documents. As Candace is saying here, right mouse click, and you're going to do Set Document Access Rights. And once you do that, you're going to scroll down and you're going to find the role that says Protected Docs. And you're going to click it. And there's going to be a box that pops open and it says you're about to grant access rights to a protected role. This will do a lot of stuff, blah, 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 blah. Click yes. Immediately what will happen is on save, those documents now become protected, which means that at the persona level, the personas will either be able to interact or not interact, depending on that right side column of the persona, based upon your settings. So good news is that was all recorded. Better news is you can replay it as many times as you need to. Best news is if you have any questions, just bring it up on the community. I've been using protected doc access rights for a long, long time. Many companies get it wrong, mostly because of the persona settings, and then also just the training. The good news is you can do it natively. Now there are a couple of companies out there that have plugins, and what the plugin will do is ignore everything I just told you about the role access to documents and the role access documents business rules and all the persona settings, And what it will do is, if you command it in the plugin level, you can actually add and remove the ability to edit that file at a plugin level. I don't like it. Yeah, it's role access to documents, Candace. But what it will do is it will bastardize native functionality, is the best way to say it. Because if you don't have the plugin, everything that you want to have happen won't happen because you haven't used native functionality properly. So Stephanie asked the question, is there a way to automatically protect a single document bucket versus users setting it manually? Yeah, it's called a plugin. That's a plugin. Now, I do expect, and I know I'm putting a lot into the future here, but I do expect this is going to be one of those things that will be in Workflow Engine. Almost guarantee it. So sometime this year, we'll see. But ICE is doing a lot of great stuff with regards to Workflow Engine. The next release is coming out here in about 4 weeks, 5 weeks, into test at least, and then into production in August. So if you're not one for Workflow Engine, you're not keeping up on that, I get it. You're busy. It's totally understandable, but you got to find time. There's a ton of value in Workflow Engine, most of which is when Scheduler gets fixed in 24.2, everybody's going to want to immediately start sending out emails 5 days before closing, that kind of a thing. No, Angie, I have not seen any release notes for 24.2, not even pre-release notes yet. They're still in, I don't even think they're in code lockdown yet. It got pushed back a month. So it was supposed to be by now into test, but it's not. The word on the street is about 4 weeks. We should see that. So hopefully that's helpful. All right. Luba, do you feel good? Oh, wait. Luba asked, so if your role access to documents are set up the quote wrong way, is applying this to one document going to mess things up? So I don't know what the wrong way is, but if you don't have your persona configured to either allow or not allow the editability of a protected document, protecting a document is irrelevant. So then, to use that example, if every persona has the ability to fully edit protected documents, there is no such thing as a protected document. That makes sense, hopefully. Yeah, so that sucks. So Luba says everything is checked on all personas. So both protected and unprotected are all checked at the persona level, right, Luba? Is that what you're seeing? So assuming that that's what you're seeing. And by the way, if everybody else, yeah. So Luba's situation is worst case scenario. So in order for this to actually work properly, Luba's got to go into all the personas. Pop quiz, what would I say to you if I said, hey, go into all your personas and see if this setting is enabled this way? Rather than go through all the personas, what could you run? Run a report. What kind of report? It's a really special kind of report. Settings report. Kevin got it. Settings report, Luba. You got it. So run a settings. No, Amy, not a system settings. What is a system settings, Amy? Settings report for persona, and you can check off the tab for eFolder, and you can see what's on there. So yeah. So what Luba's got to do, Luba, you got to go through and you got to do the hard work of unchecking all the personas that should not be able to edit a protected document in the way you don't want them to edit it. It won't change their ability to see it because that's the access, but their ability to edit it is at the persona level. So hopefully that makes sense. Great question. This is really good. Because I've seen all kinds of stuff. I've seen companies buy plugins to like change a document to like ready to ship. And then because it's a ready to ship status, that means it gets protected, like all this other stuff. Chris says we have our originators unselected for protected docs, but that's the only persona. Yeah. Yeah, because in your case, I'm guessing your business was tired of your originators goofing around and putting stuff into a document that they didn't want them to, because they probably told your originators to put it in unassigned or just give it to the processor and back off. So they only locked out originators, like loan officers. Yeah, I bet you were tired of it. I've seen that. So DDM rules. Actually had in the Mastering Admins course today, we were talking as a group about DDM for quite a while. And we were talking about the concepts of how do you make sure that, first of all, you track what fields you have in all of your rules outside of Encompass, if at all? Mostly because what's on my mind is making sure that you're not creating conflict, right? So unless you're using a truly advanced third-party settings analysis tool like ATIs, you're not going to see all the settings. If you use Kenzie Mays, you see some of the settings. If you use Lender Toolkits, you see some of the settings. And if you use the native analysis tool, you actually do see a lot of the business rules, but you can't see advanced code, which again could be problematic if you've got a field ID buried into advanced code, even in your DDM rules. So here's the question for the group that I would pose to the Mastering Admins class earlier today. Why do you use a field trigger and or a milestone completion and a cascade if ultimately you could just simply use a DDM rule, right? So that's the question. Why would you use a field trigger or a milestone completion and a cascade, and making sure the field was there and make sure the data was there versus just DDM? And Liva gives an honest answer, because I know how to use those two business rules versus the DDM rule. I think that's a fantastic answer. Kim adds, because DDM rule doesn't run until save, and I want the user to see it instantly. All right, that's the question. That's the answer I was really looking for. Linda's as honest as Luba, and that, you know, DDMs are, until you get used to them, they do feel very awkward because it is a different methodology. So Kim, I'm totally fine with your user seeing the information instantly, assuming it's on the input form that's right next to the field that they just updated, which it probably isn't. But why isn't everybody training their folks to hit Control S on the keyboard if they want to see the updates? In other words, what if field triggers, you couldn't actually see the data because the business rule didn't fire until you saved? And have I met a loan officer? Sure, but are they the same people who want things instantly? So Kim, I don't know, we could debate that part, but just to add some more comments, Chris says he doesn't use DDM. Chris, you need to start using some DDM. Who wants to tell Chris why Chris should consider some DDM? What are some of the things that you use DDMs for? This gets into our topic, right? What do we use DDMs for? And just as a recall for everybody who's not using DDMs, to kind of outline what Kim's talking about, DDM will update the file based upon one of two normal methods. The one or two normal methods are in file creation and file save. There is a third way, which is field, Kim. You can use a DDM with a field trigger inside. It actually is an activator. You can use a field change in the global settings. So if you want to use DDM but you also want to run the DDM on field trigger, you can change your global settings to include for that field. I don't know if you're aware of that, Kim. Candace says, but use judiciously, which is a hard word for me to say, apparently. Candace, I'd love to understand more about that, because I know you're speaking from experience. We got some more comments here from Stephanie. Says users forget to save until they're ready to get out of the file. Very true. Patty just used DDMs for HELOCs, which is great. Kim adds, but that's for all your DDM rules. No, that's true, but it's a trigger, but you don't actually run the trigger unless it's in the scenario, Kim. So if I knew that I wanted, I don't know, field 11 to be on there, right? I could put field 11 in the global, but I'm only going to use field 11 in my scenarios. And so then it's only going to be run. Chris says he's not sold. Chris, I'm going to say to you, you no longer have to keep your loan template sets updated for fees. I know as the business changes their amounts, you no longer have to go into every place that fee is. You can just put it into a DDM rule. That's an easy one. Stephanie adds, we use DDM to push lender fees, and it's exactly the context I was just explaining. Even if the user changes the fee, it pushes what we're set at. That's it. Yeah, totally correct. Angie is another good use case, Chris. Chris, how are you modifying and updating your FHA and/or VA factors? You can use DDM for that. Angie's using it for MI calculation LTVs for cutoffs, which is great. Candace says the global trigger reruns all DDM rules on trigger. Gotcha. Even if it's not in the scenario, Candace? Aha. All right. So I'm going to go investigate that. Thanks for that takeaway, Candace. I want to go see if that's really what their intention was. Kevin adds one example that they used was credit agency contact info every time Xactus has changed it in the last 2 years. So you just use DDM and you update it. That way you don't have to worry about data templates, Kevin. That's awesome. Stephanie adds, we also use DDM rules to push data dynamically instead of data templates, right? And that's a lot of stuff. So underwriting guidelines on a custom form for portfolio loans. That's great. Yeah, that's another good use for DDM. And so I'm going to go back to my question for the group, which kind of started this whole thread. So thanks everybody for the feedback. Is if you know you want to use the information in the file and you want the information to be there solidly, why not use DDM? And then if you begin to use DDM for everything, when does it become too much? And this is the reason why last week I wanted to introduce you into timing, like watching your timing of your save events and watching the time you're baselining as you're changing rules. Field triggers to go from point A to point B based upon data change is very snappy in this system. One of the challenges with that, of course, is making sure that the user has the access rights to update the information at the destination, which I'm sure you all know you use ignore validation errors, and that's totally fine. Except if you're posting that information to a drop-down field that doesn't have the value that you're pushing, then it actually won't work. Or if there's other integrations that are triggering that, and they're not going to trigger business rules to write field triggers to copy over. Not every third-party integration does that as well. And so this is kind of why I wanted to bring back into the conversation about workflow engine. It's not there today, right? You can't even update a standard field with a workflow engine change event. You can only update custom fields. But I do want you to start thinking about all of these rules that are running on the client side, because I'm worried that as we get into the next uptick of volume, and again, I know not everybody is experiencing upticks in volumes the same, but I think generally speaking, on average, every company is seeing more volume today than they saw earlier this year. Chances are your resources are less today than they were this time last year, at least. And so I'm concerned making sure that as you're going through and updating your rules, that number one, you pick rules that are going to make the information at the destination reliable. In DDM, we know, even though, as it's been pointed out here in this chat, there are some drawbacks into using DDM. Ultimately, if you know the destination field needs to contain a specific value based upon the circumstances of the file, that's what I want you to think of DDM. So going back to those that are not using DDM, those that said something, as well as those that are watching on the sidelines here on live event or on replay, if you're having to think about ways to make sure you stop users from entering the wrong information in a field, that's a good use case for DDM. Because if they go to modify it, they let them modify it. I don't care what they modify it to. But when they go to click save, it can only be the data that you allow as an administrator. And that's one of the most powerful things about DDM that I've always thought of. It's not necessarily trying to make the information happen. It's making sure that based upon the data in the file, the information is what it's supposed to be, based upon what the business decides. And taking that one step further, when the business decides to change its mind, you can easily create additional scenarios to sunset the scenario that was the old information and sunrise on the new information. So two things I want to point out here. I want to talk about scenario workflow, and I want to talk about this override thing Candace just pointed out. So Candace, thanks for bringing that up. Chris asks, will there be DDM for Encompass on the web? It's workflow engine for the web, Chris. Will that contain components to automatically save? I think it should. I don't know. I don't have any insider information, but I think that's where they're headed because, again, ICE has been very clear that web is going to be at desktop parity by the end of the year. As far as I know, that's still on track. So that means that we need to be able to do everything on web that we can in desktop. I'm suspicious about business rules. Hold my cards tight on the business rules, but we'll see. So two things about DDM. Let's talk about override first. What Candace and Kim are talking about when they identify that there needs to be an override. What they're talking about is just like in standard business rules, when you want to do a special carve out. So in other words, don't apply to loan 1, 2, 3, or don't apply if the user ID equals L Bailey, right? And so they carve out a custom field called an override field. And basically, in the scenario of DDM, it runs in sequence just like milestone templates do. It runs from top to bottom. And as soon as Encompass gets a yes of a scenario in that DDM rule, it runs it and it stops. So that's the reason why in the fees rules, there's only one rule per line of fee, because there's multiple scenarios to that rule. So in English, I'll use fees because it's a little bit easier to understand. If I want to change the appraisal fee to 400, always, easy, write it. If I want to change it to 400, except when it's in Florida, then it's 800. Except when it's in North Carolina, then it's 500, right? A couple ways you can do that. You can write different scenarios, or you can use a data table. But the point here is that you need to be able to, when the DDM is running, you need to be able to create a way to artificially stop the DDM from running. And that's what this override thing does. You're not overriding the data, you're stopping the DDM from running where it normally would run. So Candace, keep me honest. Kim, keep me honest, keep me on track. But that's effectively what the override is designed to do. What I really want to make sure you guys understand when you're looking at DDMs, because it's a unique way to look at rules. They run in scenarios from one to the end, and it's going to keep running in that sequence from top to bottom until it gets a yes. And so if on scenario number 5 you're calling out something specific, you've got to make sure that in scenarios 1, 2, 3, 4 you address the scenario so that it can get to number 5. Hopefully, again, that makes sense. So Kim adds, yes, I use it for appraisal fees because we sometimes have outliers that have higher fees than we manually need to enter. Katie says, yes, to ensure the override's created when you initially create your DDM rule. Candace adds, yes, or if they need a one-off for that item. And Candace, you brought this up before. Katie just talked about it really quick. If you are going to use an override field, you need to create that field before you create the DDM rule, because the DDM rule needs to see that field exists in Encompass. Candace has talked about this before. So Katie, thanks for the call out. Appreciate that. Kevin adds, our appraisal fee looks at state occupancy unit number with an override for weirdness. Totally great. Yeah, I mean, you could always, again, appraisal fees are tough because you could have a 10-acre home sitting on top of a cliff. And how you have a program for that? Like, that's a tough one to program for. It's a one-off. So Kevin adds, in a separate one for VA appraisal fees. Yeah. So Angie, definitely listen. Angie says I'm going to have to listen to that one again. There's a lot in today's, but I wanted to talk about this because it's part of Encompass Self-Health Check, where we have, I've lost count, 12 or 13 different ways to write rules standard. And then we have advanced conditioning in almost all of them. And we can't even search, by the way, with Workflow Engine on the web, you can't even search those rules for field IDs. So Angie says, no way to add after the fact. Angie, I'm assuming you're talking about the override field. Yes, you can create it after the fact, but if you want to use it in your DDM, just copy your DDM and then add it afterwards. So you can kind of cheat that way. Christopher adds, important note, if you create an override scenario for your DDM, the override needs to be at the top of the list so your system looks at it first. Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. So what Chris is talking about is, again, using my setup. If you've got 5 fields and you've got your override at the very bottom, it's not going to see it. You got to make sure that the override is in all the scenarios you want the override to apply to. Candace adds, you should have seen the, quote, home-built, quote, appraisal rotation DDM I created for Alaris. Candace, that probably should have been on the Innovators Awards at ICE. I think you should have submitted for that one. Awesome. I tell you what, time flies when you're talking about something. Is this written down somewhere I can see? There's actually a lot of DDM help within Encompass. As far as other stuff, Angie, just honestly, just keep it going in the community. Start a thread, take pictures of what you're doing, or upload a video of what you're doing if you get stuck. And we're going to be finishing up self-health checks here in June. July, we're going to get into some random topics. But the community is always about, probably not about the override. Probably you're not going to find exact information about the override, but that's what the community's for. So get to be where you are, Angie, and where you get stuck with the override after listening to this, especially this replay. Just ask the community for help. I mean, you got a ton of people on here with experience with it. So, so that's it. That's DDM. And again, leverage what I taught last week about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to last week's replay. I show you how to get that enabled so you can see how much time your system is taking. DDM rules will go into that calculation. So if you have a ton of them and it's slowing your system down, you got to figure it out. That's it for today, gang. Unless you have any other questions, I like to keep these to 30 minutes. It took a fair bit of maintenance for vacations. Oh, with assignments, yeah. Yeah, it's Encompass administration. Keeps us on our toes, keeps us young, and keeps us busy and employed. So thank you. You guys have a great rest of your day. That's what I just said, John. John's like job security. I'm like, of course. I'm like, if you know DDMs and nobody else does, you're not going anywhere. All right, gang, you guys have a great rest of your day. Aloha. Have a great day. Enjoy. And write some DDM rules. Candace will be checking on you. All right, I'll see you. Bye-bye.